All right. So now let's say something together. I want everyone to say extra. Ordinary. We're saying it right. Extraordinary. What I'm talking about today is not about being extraordinary. I'm talking about being extraordinary. You know the people that kind of seem to have everything all together. They just always seem to have everything right. They're good at whatever they do. Well, I'm not talking about those people today. This message is about the ordinary people. And when I say extraordinary, I'm saying that not just ordinary, but you've got an extra dose of ordinary in your life. Something that tends to happen to me from time to time is I'll fall asleep driving if I'm driving late at night. And it's a bad thing. I try not to drive late at night, but there are times when I'm stuck somewhere and I have to drive home late, especially if it's a longer trip. And I always will listen to something while I'm on the road, and generally I'll have some music playing. But every once in a while, the music just isn't enough, and I need to go to my go-to playlist. There's this one album that takes me back, and every time that I put it in, it really kind of gets me going. So the music, just the regular music, it just gets mundane, it just gets routine. So I'll put this playlist on, and if I'm falling asleep, it's like this here. Yeah! And I'm weaving in and out of traffic. It's the soundtrack to Top Gun. And so what happens is I'm just weaving in and out of traffic. Sometimes I'll quote lines from the movie. I'm like, oh, man, you got a bogey on your 6. Talk to me, goose. And I look down, and I'm going 95 down I-75, and I'm weaving in and out of traffic. And I'm like, whoa, got to back off. It's just a real good jolt in the arm. It really mixes up the routine. It really gets me going, breaking up the monotony. I've learned something about life that's true. Our lives can go through the same routine over and over and over again too. It may look a little bit different at times, but for the most part, you work, you come home, you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you go to work. It just goes over and over and over again. In fact, your life resembles more like hi-ho than highway to the danger zone. You know, hi-ho, it's off to work I go. Or some people say I-O, so off to work I go. But the rhythms of life have a tendency to put us to sleep, and we find ourselves napping because life itself can be routine. And for some of us, it can get boring at times, and some of you might have experienced that. There are a few moments when we can actually live life at peak level. Sometimes that's a high that's really good. Sometimes it's an emotional high. It might not necessarily be good, but we're really kind of living on these emotions. And most of the time, though, life is just routine. And people would look at my life sometimes and say, there's no way your life is routine. You have 5 children. And like, yes, I say that all the time when people say, well, what do you do with all those kids? I'm like, well, there's never a dull moment at my house. But that's only partially true, because in reality, too much extraordinary becomes ordinary. And there are moments when I find myself in a rut. I'm going through rhythm and it puts me to sleep. Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite presidents, had this quote. He said, God must love the common man. He made so many of them. And I would be willing to bet that most of us have had moments like this. You've experienced at some point in your life. And I can assure you that if your life feels mundane, if your life feels ordinary, you're not alone. But the hope today is this. God does some of his best work through ordinary events and ordinary people. Some of the best things that God ever does are through the people who just are regular people. One of the most ordinary people in the Bible is a man named Isaac. Isaac was the chosen son of Abraham. He was the father of Jacob. We talked about Jacob a couple of weeks ago, and Esau. He's the grandfather of Joseph. But the things that we don't read lead me to believe that Isaac's life was pretty ordinary. We see a lot, or we don't see very much about his life actually in Scripture, so that kind of leads me to believe that it was rather common. Whenever you see Isaac in the Bible, it's almost always about what God did in someone else's life. Isaac just is a supporting character. He's a role player. His role it's important, but it's about the other person. So when Isaac was born, he was born to his parents in their old age. that was about them. It was fulfilling a promise that God made to Abraham. It wasn't necessarily about Isaac. So we see Isaac taken to the top of a mountain, and he's laid on the altar, and he's getting ready to be sacrificed. That is his father's faithfulness. Again, it's not about him. So we have Isaac, whose life story is sandwiched between two patriarchs of the faith. You've got Abraham on one side, and you've got Jacob on the other, his son Jacob, whose name would be changed to Israel. But there's a chapter that is dedicated, a big portion of Scripture here, that is dedicated to Isaac's life. This story is all Isaac. Now, he's mentioned throughout the Bible in other places, but this one particular section is all for him. And that is in Genesis chapter 26, beginning in verse 1. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. And I will give your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar." And that's it. That's the excitement. That is ordinary and common. Throughout the book of Genesis, this is his chapter. This is his opportunity now to shine. And what we get out of it is there's going to be a famine in the land, and God says, don't go anywhere. And that's pretty much the life of Isaac. When you look at Isaac's life compared to some of the others in the Bible, it doesn't seem that big of a deal. We see somebody like Balaam, who we can read about how Balaam got to talk to a donkey. Now, Balaam got to talk to a donkey because he was doing something he shouldn't have, but I don't know anybody else in here that's been able to talk to a donkey. Well, never mind, I'm not going to go there. Elijah, let's look at Elijah. Elijah gets to go up on Mount Carmel, and he has this moment with the prophets of Baal where he calls down fire from heaven. And fire comes and consumes the sacrifice and the altar and all the water that had been poured around. That is something really cool that I would love to see and be a part of. Or you go to the next one, Elisha. When Elisha first takes on the mantle after Elijah goes up into heaven in 2 Kings chapter 2, you can go and see that there's some kids who are making fun of his receding hairline. So what Elisha does is he calls 2 bears out of the woods, and they maul 42 of these young people. Young people, do not make fun of people's receding hairlines. But Elisha got the opportunity to experience a double portion from what Elijah had. So there are all these amazing stories and miracles, and Isaac gets to stay put during a famine. And that's where many of us live. This is our life. We're not seeking the extraordinary. We're just kind of stuck. We're not really moving. Abraham, Isaac's father, he had to leave his homeland and not knowing where he was going. And while that's some people would say that's exciting, other people would say that's scary. But again, it's something. We talked about Isaac's son Jacob 2 weeks ago and how he wrestled with God, and his name was changed to Israel from Jacob, deceiver, heel grabber. We called him Slick because he was always trying to work the angles with somebody. But eventually, once he's changed, he would become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and eventually through his son Judah would come the line that would go all the way to King David, all the way to Jesus, the Messiah himself. Isaac gets to stay put during a famine. Here's something that I'm learning about my life. The older I get, the more common my life becomes. I recently met with someone who was my dad's pastor when I was born. He has served the church for years and years, and I got a chance to meet and have breakfast with him. And the thing is, he sees me as Rod Cannon's son. And that's not a bad thing. I love my dad. My dad's a great man. But I'm seen as his son in that guy's eyes. And no matter what my ministry looks like or whatever, that's just how our relationship is. And so the older I get, I'm realizing that not only is that who I am to some people, but my identity in the middle gets grouped in. I become the father of Charlotte, Keaton, Caroline, Katia, and Sarah. It's not about me, it's about my kids. And you know, I looked back recently because there was something that I really wanted to take a look at to make this point here. I can post something about myself on Facebook or an inspirational quote that I think will be life-giving to people. And I did that, and there was something, got some likes. Let me throw it up there. Let's see. It says, great leaders don't always make the right decision, but they do always make a decision. People will scatter when a leader is ineffective in decision-making. I was reading a book that stood out to me. I'm like, wow. You know, I know of a lot of people that are kind of waffling between. Let me share that out there as a leadership post and see. And it ended up getting like 30 people ended up liking it. I'm like, all right, hey, how about that? Isn't that cute? 30 people of my like 1,500 followers, there are 30 people who thought, I'm going to give that a little like. Oh. And a couple people gave it a heart. They were like, oh, look at there. It just ministered to them. Feeling a little good about myself, and now y'all laughing at me. Or I can throw up a post with my kids in it. Oh yeah, this was them playing in the yard with their phone. Charlotte took the picture and she airdropped it to me. I thought it was cool. It's like, all right, I'll share that. Well, how do you think that fared? 163. Zoom in. Let me say 163 people like that. I'm giving people life-giving leadership lessons. Sometimes I'll post scriptures and they'll scroll right past it. But if I put my kids up there, oh, this shit are getting so big. Click, like. Oh, there was more than one or two loves on that one. I got a whole bunch. I think my mom liked it, unliked it, and then loved it, and then unloved it so she could love it again because any chance she gets to see the kids. So I'm stuck between being Rod's son and all these kids' dad. And the older I get, the more that applies. So I want to share this. This is what I know about ordinary people. God uses ordinary people to serve extraordinary people. God will use the ordinary to serve the extraordinary. As a young boy, Isaac gets taken to a mountaintop. And he and his father are there, and his dad ties him to an altar because Abraham heard a voice from heaven telling him to sacrifice his son. Now that is a moment of faith right there. And of course, right when Abraham's about to sacrifice Isaac on the altar, God provides a ram in the bushes. I don't know how you can be more of a servant to someone than laying down your life. It doesn't say that Isaac pushed back or didn't give his father his complete willing. All it says along the way was, where's the sacrifice, he asked. And Abraham said, God will provide. In fact, in John 15:13, Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, than he lay down his life for one's friends. You can't serve someone more than being willing to lay down your life for their calling. Many of you know what it's like to put your own desires aside because of someone else's calling. Throughout my years of ministry, I'm in my 19th year of ministry now, full-time ministry, and during that, when Lindsay and I got married 17 years ago, we uprooted and moved to Georgia. She had lived in the same house right there. In fact, her mom still lives in the house that she was brought home from the hospital. And I had moved all over the place for various reasons, and so her life then changed. What was stable for her, the same house and pretty much the same bedroom for her entire life. Now we were going here for a while, and God would call us somewhere else, and God would call us here and there. And sometimes I wonder if God called me to some place or if it was even me. And usually when that happened, it wasn't very long, and I was going somewhere else. But we ended up in Frostproof before we came here for 7 years. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life. But every time we had to uproot, just as Lindsay was getting in the groove somewhere, we would have to move somewhere else. And now it was 7 years, and she had developed friendships, and my kids had developed friendships, and God called us here, and it's a great thing. It's been wonderful since we've been here. But the point being, she knows what it's like, and my kids know what it's like to kind of set something aside for somebody else's calling. And that's what was going on here. God used Isaac to serve his father, Abraham. Second thing that I know is this. God uses the ordinary people to influence extraordinary people. Not only do the ordinary people serve the extraordinary, but they also have the opportunity to influence. If you keep reading in that same chapter, Genesis 26, Isaac redug the wells of his father. The Philistines had come and filled in the wells that Abraham had dug in order to provide for his family. But in verse 18 it said, Isaac dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. Why is that significant? Because Isaac was preparing to provide for his family, his sons, one of whom is Jacob. Now we know this, Isaac lived in such a way that Jacob wanted his father's blessing, so much so that he was willing to deceive his brother and deceive his own father in order to receive that blessing. He stole it from his brother. He deceived his brother twice. And I've told you about how Jacob went from being named deceiver and slick to being prince with God, to being named Israel. But think about this. There was something about Isaac's life that Jacob wanted. There was something about it that he was willing to deceive his brother and his father at his mother's, working behind the scenes. But there was something about it that he needed to have. Excuse me. Whether it was wealth, wisdom, whatever it was, Jacob was willing to go to the extremes to get what his father had. Isaac lived his life in such a way that he influenced Jacob to want what he had. So as a result, Jacob's life would be changed and he would become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. But I can't overlook the fact that God used ordinary Isaac's life to influence Jacob. According to the Bible, the same God who is the God of Abraham is the God of Isaac. He becomes the same God of Jacob. And all throughout the Bible, he is referred to that. He is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Numerous times in Scripture it's mentioned that way. And this is what gives me hope. I actually need some help here. Let me get a couple of volunteers. You don't have to do anything but stand. So I need some hands. Come on, let me get Tony, come on. All right, one more. Just one more guy volunteer, one more man. Oh, come on, y'all help me. Jump up. Come on, David. Oh, somebody raised David's hand for him. Whoops. That's okay. All right, how about this? Tony, you come stand right here at this corner. Isaac, you stand in the middle. And David, you stand on that side. All right. So what we have here is we have this great man of faith, Abraham, who dropped everything to follow the call of God. Abraham was going fine, everything was where he was, but God said, nope, I want you to go somewhere special. And so that's what he did. He dropped and he moved his family to follow the call of God. This is Abraham, a man who's willing to sacrifice his own son if need be. And then we've got on the other side, we've got this slick manipulator, this guy who would, no, not David. David's a good guy. But we have David who is representing this small portion of Jacob's life that he was the manipulator. But he became Israel. He became the patriarch. He became the name that the nation would carry for years and years and years. So in between this pillar of faith of Abraham and this pillar of faith in Jacob, who is known as Israel, we have Isaac. The guy with yes, his name is really Isaac. The guy with the average, ordinary, routine life. Now, it's not. He's an extraordinary guy. But we're talking about, for these purposes here, the ordinary life. It's a life that most of us wouldn't want. There's no excitement to it. The biblical Isaac. Here's what he gets. God speaks and says, stay put. Don't leave when times get hard. In all the Bible, this is your story. Enjoy it. But here's the beautiful thing. He is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He doesn't skip over Isaac because Isaac didn't get to do any of the amazing things as far as the scriptures say. It's easy to look in the middle and say, well, he didn't make much of a difference. God didn't use him. But when you start looking at how he was able to serve an extraordinary man and how he was able to influence a man who would become an extraordinary man, you can see how God can use your life in the middle of the routine, in the middle of the mundane. You begin to look around and say, well, wait a minute, I'm beginning to serve this person. Well, I have influence on that person. Maybe God has more for me than I realize. Maybe God is doing something that I I just can't see yet. And you begin to see how you can better serve someone who you consider to be extraordinary, and how you can influence somebody who may not be there yet, but at some point they will be extraordinary. Thank you, guys. It may not seem like it now, but you're influencing people who are going to be pillars of faith tomorrow. Do you believe that there are those in the next generation who are going to be extraordinary? I do. I think it's amazing. Mike Brown was talking about it this morning, about how so many of these people going on the mission trip to Guatemala are young people. There are teenagers that are going on this trip. And it's not just that. We have teenagers and young people serving in church all across this campus right now, and that do so through the week. This is amazing because we have the opportunity to influence the next generation. How can I influence the next generation? Well, you can host some of these kids that are coming from China. Man, what better way to influence somebody than for 2 weeks for you to pray with them, for you to bring them to church on the Sunday that they're here, for you to bring them to Wednesday Connect groups or whatever, and just really pour in. You have an opportunity to influence the next generation, because if you don't influence them in a positive way, somebody will influence them in a negative way. They are going to be influenced, and I'm not willing to sit back and say it's somebody else's job. I'll tell you this ain't in my notes, but for those of you who work in the school system, you understand. Far too long, parents have said, the school will deal with this. I don't want to have to deal with it. It ain't the school's job to raise your kids. But your life may seem boring. But watch this. Without Isaac, who's Abraham going to sacrifice? Ishmael wasn't the chosen son. Without Isaac, there's no sacrifice. Without Isaac, Jacob ends up worshiping some pagan god instead of the God of his grandfather and his father. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 26 says this: think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Whew. Is Paul writing to me here? I think so. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. Anybody in here a secret royal that I don't know about? You know, you got that whole prince and the pauper thing going. You swap places with somebody so you can be one of the normal. No, nobody like, no, I didn't think so. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He's talking about me. Look, you may apply that to yourself. It's not my place to say whether you're not you're foolish. But I can look at that and say, he's using Rodney, the foolish thing, to shame the wise. God uses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God he chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. In other words, God uses the ordinary people, the ordinary things, to influence and to serve the extraordinary. There's a particular cactus that's found in Central and South America, and I've never had the privilege to see it in all its glory, but the truth is very few people actually have. It's called the Queen of the Night, because it only blooms at the most one night per year. Not day, it blooms at night. Sometimes it can be 2 or 3 years between blooms. But every day it looks like an ordinary cactus. Every day it just looks like, oh, that's a nice cactus. But one night a year, the Queen of the Night reveals itself for what it really is, and it happens when nobody's watching. I have a picture of one of them here. That's the bloom on the Queen of the Night cactus. Somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., it blooms into this white, very royal-looking flower. People walk by it every day, and they don't pay attention to it because it really doesn't look like anything special on the outside. People have them sitting in front of their houses. They don't even know what it is because they never see it bloom. Nobody knows a Queen of the Night unless they walk by it when it happens to be in full bloom on the night that God allows it to shine in all its glory. And this is the beautiful part right here. It happens during the night. It's not for the world to see. If I had created something like that, I would have it bloom and it would stay bloomed. It would grow in every climate. And no matter what, people would walk by and look at it and say, wow, that's beautiful, Rodney. You sure did make something beautiful. But that's not what it was. I believe that God created that to bloom at that time so that he is the one who could see it in its fullness. For some of you who are wondering why someone else's life is extraordinary, I don't know why. Some people's lives are meant to be displayed publicly. But then there are others who don't get to see the glory that God has in their lives because God chooses to reveal himself through them when no one is looking. If God's called you to be something that you consider boring, understand that in the middle of your boredom, be the best whatever that is that you can be. Because when no one else is watching, God's glory shines through you. When nobody else is paying attention, God is paying attention. Because when no one else is watching, you're influencing, you're serving, and your life will have an extraordinary impact. Shine when no one's looking. Be extraordinary for God because he's the one who called you in the first place. If you're called to do dishes to the best of your ability for the glory of God. If he's called you to take out the trash at the best of your ability for the glory of God. If he's called you to be a teacher, man, influence those lives the best that you can for the glory of God. If he's called you to be a minister, serve, minister, everything that you can do for the glory of God. Because your ordinary life is setting an example for somebody else to follow. If he's called you to go on a missions trip, go on that trip and serve at all the corners of the world, the best that you can. If he's called you to host some of these kids coming from China, man, influence these kids while you have them. Be a missionary in your own home. He hasn't called everyone to be extraordinary in the world. If everyone is extraordinary, then no one is extraordinary. And that's something, don't fall into that trap. If everything is the best and the greatest and wonderful and super and awesome, then nothing is wonderful, great, and super and awesome. Something must actually be better than normal in order to be that way. But he has called everyone to be extraordinary when no one's looking. He has called you to be the best that you can be, not for the glory of yourself, not so other people can recognize it, so that he can look down and say, yes. Isaac was extraordinary to God as he served his father. Isaac was extraordinary to God as he was influencing his son. And because of that, he's always mentioned when people refer to God as the God of Abraham, Isaac,